Hello, everybody. Welcome to Opera 101 with the Cleveland Opera Theater. My name is Stephanie Ruozzo, and I'm an Education and Outreach Associate with the Cleveland Opera Theater. Happy to join you today for our latest edition of Opera 101, which is for all ages, where we get to talk some new fascinating tidbit about opera each day. And we do want to talk. So please, if you have any questions at any time, pop them in the comments. We'll be glad to chat with you. Or do email me at sruzzo@clevelandoperatheater.org. That's SRUOZZO at clevelandoperatheater.org. And I'm going to get you any information you could possibly want about today's topic or any of our topics. Why not? So today we are celebrating, well, all week, we are celebrating La Cenerentola of Rossini because July is Rossini month here at the COT. And we usually think of the prima donna in any bel canto opera as a soprano for very practical reasons, because most opera houses were so large, they required higher voices like sopranos and tenors to cut through, to be audible without microphones. Remember, the vast majority of opera history takes place in an age pre-amplification. So in most operas, we do have higher voice types, but Rossini, especially in La Cenerentola, flips these vocal types on their heads. And Cenerentola is the perfect example of just how he does that. So in most operas, the lower female voice types, which are mezzo-sopranos, altos, and contraltos, the usual function of those voice types is as a second lady. So she's definitely not the prima donna. She's not our star. She's usually in a love triangle, so she might be the other woman. And we make a joke in opera that the lower female voice type only get to play witches, britches, and mean ladies. So she's always the underdog, the side character. And the perfect example might be like Amneris in Aida. The exception to this is, of course, Bizet's Carmen, where the mezzo actually does take the leading role, but other times the mezzo or contralto could be matronly, like the Marquise in Donizetti's La Fille de Régiment. But as the 1800s progresses, we see distinctions develop between these lower voice types like mezzo, alto, and contralto. But at the time Rossini was composing, these lines weren't as firmly drawn, and these lower female voices there could be some slippage in the meaning. They could actually overlap, not only in range, but in function, in the type of music that they sang that was written for them. So to conceptualize voices that the way they would have at Rossini's time, these lower female voices would have been called contraltos. And contraltos, the range usually starts at F below middle C and goes up 2 octaves. So an octave is when a singer does the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That's an octave. If you do that twice in a row, then that would be the range of the contralto, starting on the F below middle C. So it sits right above a tenor's range. It's just a shade higher than a tenor. And these contraltos could be divided into 3 different types. There were oratorio contraltos, so they had this rich, low tessitura, very heavy on the bottom, meant for choral singing, and their strength was blending with the other inner voices. So their strength was filling out the range of frequencies below soprano and bass, or I should say in between soprano and bass. There were operatic contraltos, and they had sustained high notes. They were able to be really powerful in their upper tessitura, their upper range. So they would hit these high A's and B flats and sustain them and be able to live on those notes for quite a while. It demanded forceful elocution, forceful singing, forceful attacks, and sustenance for those high pitches. So that's operatic. We've got oratorio and operatic. And then there's this other hybrid thing called the Southern operatic contralto. And that's what Rossini would have been composing for. It was a contralto with a very bright color. So what musicians call overtones are very present. So when we think of sound waves, When you hear a pitch, you're actually hearing several pitches above it stacked on top of it. And a bright color, a bright timbre for a voice is one where those overtones, those higher notes, are resonating much more strongly and are much more present than they would in a darker tone where the overtones don't resonate as strongly. These Southern operatic contraltos had to have great dexterity. So they had to be able to do those tricks that we talked about before, the embellishments, the runs, the leaps. And over time, this Southern operatic contralto morphed into our present conception of the mezzo-soprano. Mezzo-sopranos are a little bit different. Their range traditionally begins at A below middle C. So the contralto was at F below middle C. The mezzo sits on an A below middle C. It's a third higher. And of course, they also go up 2 octaves. So that do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do twice over. They can sing all of those notes. Their timbre is usually darker than a soprano. So again, they're emphasizing the lower range. And I want to refer you back to Megan's video from one of our earliest Opera 101s on the female voice types. And she walks you through that in much more detail. So I'll leave my description of mezzos there. And the voice type system, the classification system today that we use, basically ignores contraltos, but highlights coloratura, mezzos. And so the roles end up being labeled as mezzo-sopranos that Rossini wrote, but they were sung by singers that he would have classified as contraltos. So there's some slippage. Again, Rossini called these people contraltos, and his contemporaries called them contraltos. We label them as coloratura mezzos, and both are correct. And it's its own type of hybrid animal that is really fascinating to listen to. So what about Rossinian mezzo writing makes her special? What's different about the way Rossini writes for these lower female voice types? Well, Rossini was living at a time when castrati, so men who were surgically altered before adolescence, so that their voices would never change from their childlike voices, these castrati were falling out of favor during Rossini's lifetime. And so that vocal range had to be covered somehow. So women with lower voices could actually provide the same notes that these castrati would typically have provided. And it was just as popular. So even though the vocal range was just as popular in Rossini's age, the people who filled it changed. And so Rossini became a central figure in that change. So Cenerentola was written it premiered in 1817, and it was just a year after Barber of Seville, 1816. And these are both operas that are immensely popular, both fairly early in Rossini's compositional career, and they are career-defining operas that we know him by today. And both of these operas highlight as the prima donna this Rossinian mezzo. They make use of these specific strengths that Rossini could tap into. And Rossini was a bel canto pioneer. And remember that bel canto opera prized melody over harmony. It prized the voice over the orchestra, and it prized a solo line over accompaniment. So the vocal writing is characterized by 2 things called coloratura and fioritura. Coloratura, coloring, means rapid changes, whether it be in dynamics / volume, tempo / speed, or timbre / color. A good coloratura singer is able to make those changes rapidly in their voice. And they're subtle changes, but they happen so quickly as to be dazzling in their brilliance. And fioritura, flowering, is, all those runs and leaps that embellish the melody. Again, we're talking embellishment, highly ornate melody, because we're paying attention to the voice on top over the block, the big monolith of the orchestra beneath. And Rossini was one of the first composers who actually wrote all of this fioritura into his score rather than allowing the composer or allowing the singer, I'm sorry, to improvise in the moment. And I want to share with you a quote from Rossini about the way he conceptualized this writing for the contraltos. And he says, quote, "The contralto is the norm against which the other voices and instruments must be gauged. One should concentrate on the central register in order to always be in tune. At the extreme ends, what you gain in force, you often lose in grace. And by this abuse, you paralyze the throat, resorting as a remedy to canto declamato, that is, out of tune shouting," end quote. So in other words, Rossini thought that for bel canto opera to survive or thrive even, for bel canto opera to reach its most beautiful, it had to be set in that low female voice range, that middle range that sits comfortably between the extremes of frequencies. And if you went to the extremes of frequencies, you would no longer have a beautiful melody. It would not be bel canto. So that's why Rossini focused so much on his mezzos, or contraltos as he would have called them. And that's why the Rossinian mezzo is its own type of superstar in opera today. I would like to highlight from La Cenerentola the aria Non più mesta as the non-parial textbook example of the Rossinian mezzo. So it's an aria at the end of La Cenerentola when Cinderella is forgiving her stepsisters and father for having treated her so ill all these years. And it's the cabaletta part of the solita forma or Rossini code that we talked about last time. So remember that the cabaletta was the fast finale part, where she gets the mezzo or tenor, if it's a tenor, but in this case a mezzo, gets to show off with all of her vocal fireworks. And it's literally the subtitle of the opera, The Triumph of Goodness or Virtue, in our musical case, virtuosity. So in this aria, Cinderella is literally demonstrating how virtuosity triumphs over all evil. It will outlast and dominate and win the day. So this cabaletta is the perfect example of how virtuosity wins. I am going to link you up to a performance by Cecilia Bartoli, and her Non più mesta demonstrates the typical what any mezzo would strive for. So I'm going to link you up to her performance, and I'm also going to link you up to a violinist, Salvatore Accardo, who's performing a set of a theme and variations that Niccolò Paganini, the famous Italian violin virtuoso, he composed a set of variations on the theme of Non più mesta. And that's the discussion of virtuosity in the 19th century could be a discussion that could last several hours on a whole other day. So I won't open that can of worms right now, but I just want you to be able to experience how musicians have gravitated towards these demanding and these crazy, difficult, technical melodies as a source of pleasure. And I hope you experience the same pleasure that the musicians who would perform it do. So I want to thank you so much for joining me today for Opera 101. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. Do please check out our website, clevelandoperatheater.org, to sign up for the mailing list, get all of our latest information, especially our July 25th concert that's coming up. I cannot wait for you to experience that. There will be some Rossini involved. And please do like our Facebook page. Join us on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We have content to share with you on all of those platforms, and we'd love to engage with you there. And until then, I'll see you soon. Bye, guys. Thank you.